at the racecourse. It was organised by BBC Radio Manchester, and you can hear it in full now.
Mike Sweeney, BBC Radio Manchester.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming, and welcome to Fracking, the big debate, here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. We're here at Haydock Park Racecourse in the heart of the North West, and it's estimated that around 2,000 metres below our feet here is shale gas, trapped in rocks. Not that we're obviously not suggesting that they're about to start drilling out on the racecourse now, we hope. Anyway, I don't know if anybody's got any ideas to do that. They're not listening. They're getting their drinks. But it is widely accepted that the North West has large amounts of shale underground. So the question is whether we should go ahead and drill for that gas by using the controversial technique of fracking. And that's what, of course, we'll all be debating here with the help of our panel of guests and an audience of people from right across the North West. Before we introduce our panel, though, we really need to explain, I suppose, what is fracking. So here's Matt Truan with everything you need to know in 60 seconds.
The word fracking is short for hydraulic fracturing, and in simple terms it's a way of extracting or getting out natural gas which is trapped in rocks below the ground. But what is the fracking process? Well, a mixture of water, sand and a small amount of chemicals is pumped down a well at high pressure. That mixture pushes apart or fractures a rock and allows the gas which is trapped inside to flow back up where it can be captured. And there's plenty of shale here in the northwest. Some say there's enough to power the country for decades, but it's a highly controversial technique which has attracted fierce opposition. The anti-fracking movement say the chemicals used could potentially contaminate water supplies. There's also concern about earth tremors, air pollution and the impact on people's health. However, the shale gas industry and the government insist fracking in the UK will be safe and well regulated. They say tapping into this huge gas reserve will bring jobs, energy security and will help stabilise our gas prices in the future.
Matt Truan there. So let's introduce you to our panel then. We're going to ask each of you to give a short opening summary of why you think fracking will be good or bad for the North West. You've got a maximum of 30 seconds and we will be timing. So we mean a maximum of 30 seconds. So let me introduce our first panellist. Francis Egan is the Chief Executive of Quadrilla Resources, the energy company that's been exploring for shale gas in Lancashire since 2010. He joined the company 2 years ago after some 30 years of working in engineering and management in the oil and gas industry. Originally from Ireland, Francis lives in the North West now with his wife and 2 children.
Thank you. So in 30 seconds, I and many others are convinced that domestically produced shale gas is going to have a key role to play, along with nuclear and renewables, in our energy supply mix moving forward in the North West and the rest of England, and indeed all of the UK. Sitting far beneath our feet here, we have several trillion cubic feet of gas. If we could recover just 10% of what we believe is in the ground in Lancashire alone, that's probably worth about £140 billion at today's prices. That's a huge economic opportunity. I'm convinced that Lancashire has the ability to deliver it.
Just got it in, well done. John Blaymyers is the Chief Operating Officer at iGas, the company currently exploring for shale gas and coalbed methane at Barton Moss in Salford. The firm also has licences to explore in Cheshire and Merseyside. John has 30 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, including operations in the United States, West Africa and Southeast Asia. He's originally, though, from here in the North West.
Thank you, Annabelle. Good evening, everybody. First of all, we all enjoy a hot shower, washing clothes and cooking family meals are things we take for granted, but we can't do that without energy. Energy is essential. We're seeing declining power stations, we're seeing the North Sea in decline. We have to ensure we've got security of supply so we can keep the lights on. We need to explore a range of technologies to do that, and that includes renewables, but it also potentially includes shale as a possible source of that energy.
Tom Crotty is the director at the international chemical company INEOS. The firm employs around 1,400 people at its plant in Runcorn and 15,000 across the world. He also sits on the CBI's Energy and Climate Change Board. He's a strong supporter of the shale gas industry and the impact it could have on business and the wider economy. Tom was born in Ireland but has lived here in the northwest for most of his life.
Thank you, Annabelle. Chemicals is our business and is an integral part of the northwest economy, and it's seriously threatened. Right now, energy prices for us are about 70% higher than our competitors on the continent and double what we're paying for our competitors in America. Shale gas is bringing about a renaissance in American chemicals, $70 billion of new investment. That's an enormous threat. We will not have a chemical industry in this country unless we exploit this potential opportunity.
Oh, under 30 seconds. Well done. Well, I guess they are the ones that we would say are for shale gas. Let's now move on to the people not for shale gas. And we'll start with Barbara Keeley, who's the Labour MP for Worsley and Eccles South. She's been an MP in the area since 2005, and she's also a member of the Commons Health Committee. iGas's exploratory drilling site at Barton Moss in Salford is in her constituency, and she's publicly voiced her concerns about fracking. Barbara has lived and worked in the northwest for the past 30 years.
Well, Annabelle, I've never agreed with the shale gas exploration at Barton Moss. It's causing the industrialisation of land near Chat Moss, which is a precious area of greenbelt land. It's an untested process. It's brought us controversy, protest and lots of traffic congestion. It's causing harm and distress. And I'm very concerned about the possible health hazards for people, animals and wildlife. It's bringing major disruption and financial loss to my constituents. If that was played out across the northwest, it would be very damaging.
Thank you, Barbara. Helen Rimmer is the Northwest campaigner for the environmental group Friends of the Earth, with whom she's worked for 6 years. Before that, she was with the Government Sustainable Development Commission. She works with various anti-fracking campaign groups across the region and was born and brought up in Leyland in Lancashire. She now lives in Greater Manchester.
We think unconventional fossil fuels and fracking is highly risky for the environment, for the health of communities and for our climate. It's not the answer to our energy problems. It will add more climate-changing emissions into the atmosphere while doing nothing to reduce our energy bills. We have a much more positive vision for the northwest economy, and that's one that's based on renewable energy, clean renewable energy, community-owned energy, and making our homes more energy efficient and cutting energy waste. And that will be better for jobs, better for local economies, and will protect our precious environment as well.
And spot on time-wise. Well done, Helen. Now, finally, Mike Hill is a chartered electrical engineer with experience in the oil and gas industry. He's recently carried out a 3-year study into the regulation of the shale gas industry. He's currently part of a team advising the European Commission, and he's given evidence to the government and the Royal Society. He also advises several anti-fracking campaign groups. Mike lives with his family in Lytham on Lancashire's Fylde coast.
Thanks, Annabelle. Yes, basically, in a nutshell, the situation is that regulations in this country, the regulatory regime, the regulators themselves and the inspection thereof is not sufficient to cope with shale gas onshore in the UK. And in the 3 years that I've been researching those regulations, I found the government cutting the regulators back, opposing any new regulations and not implementing at all, bar one, of the Royal Society's recommendations to allow shale gas to go on in this country. So it shouldn't happen at this stage, not at all.
OK, so they are our 6 panellists this evening. Can we please have our first question?
I'm Bob Roach. I'm a member of the St Helens University of the Third Age. My question is that, recognising that we've got to get our energy from somewhere, what impact could fracking have on our energy? And I recognise some points have been made already on that point. And secondly, would it be better for us to have fracking, or worse, than meeting our needs for energy from nuclear reactors? OK, so Helen Rimmer, Friends of the Earth, would it be better to get more of our energy, or worse, to get more of our energy from nuclear power?
We don't think we need unconventional gas or nuclear because we have such excellent renewable resources in the UK, and particularly in the northwest of England. We have huge offshore wind resource in the Irish Sea. We have tidal power. Potentially we could have wave power, and of course we've got solar and other smaller scale energies as well at our disposal. So we don't think we actually need either, and there's plenty of evidence to show that modelling. And I think the question about whether we do need shale gas to meet the energy needs right now, we don't need to be finding new sources of fossil fuels because we already have more than we can burn in conventional proven resources of gas. We don't need to be finding these risky unconventional sources, and we simply have to reduce our fossil fuel use for climate change. We need to keep within 2 degrees to keep to a safe climate. We're already seeing the effects of climate change this winter with the floods, and we've had floods in Lancashire as well over the past few years. So we need to be moving away from fossil fuels, investing in our renewable energy resources and reducing our energy demand.
So, John Blamars, we don't need more unconventional sources of energy.
Well, 2 things. One, we need multiple types of energy. We can't rely entirely on renewables. We have to at the moment, rely predominantly on coal, which has a much worse CO2 impact than gas. Gas has half the impact of coal. So what we should be doing is displacing coal from the mix, point 1. Point 2, I think we will need nuclear, and we will need renewables. We'll need all these forms of energy. We will not be able to survive without it. At the moment, renewables fulfill about somewhere between 5 and 10% of the total energy requirements. It is never going to reach a point where it can take up the slack of gas, etc., from the energy mix, point 1. And point 2, you will not be able to afford it if it takes on that. It can only probably manage about 20% of our total energy requirements.
That's not true when you look at other European countries who have a much higher proportion of renewables in their energy mix. It's simply not true.
The UK gets 4% of its energy from renewables. 4%. If you take out nuclear. So this fantasy that we can supply all our energy from renewables and energy efficiency in anything less than decades is just lying to people. We get 96% of our energy from non-renewables. That's a fact. That is a fact. That includes
the reality
Scotland.
Is the DEC.
4% of our energy.
One second. Let's bring Mike Hill in.
Yeah, sorry, when I was discussing this with the DEC on a number of occasions down in London, the DEC have made it clear to me that...
who's
the Department of Energy and Climate Change. Sorry, the Department of Energy and Climate Change made it clear to me that shale gas will never form greater than 5% of the UK's energy in any 1 year. And I asked them why not. So Francis talks about 4%, shale will only ever be 5%. And I asked them why not, and they said because we would have to evacuate whole areas of the country if we were to allow production to be greater than 5%. In terms of the renewables energy mix, I agree to a certain extent with John. We do need a mix of energy in the UK, absolutely, but not at the cost of the public's health. I don't care whether it's nuclear, coal, whatever it is, you can't be exploring and then producing shale gas to the cost of the public's health. Not at all.
Let's bring Francis Egan back in on that one.
So I don't know who Mike is talking to in DEC, but the idea that we can only get 5% from shale gas is just nonsense. Let me finish, please. I listen to you. Can you listen to me, please? 5%. So who's going to limit it to 5%?
The government are going to limit it to 5%.
So who in the government has said that, Mike?
I'm not going to say that, Francis. I'm not going to say that. Because that
well, that's good, Mike. Yeah.
No,
so maybe the government will answer tomorrow who has said that they'll limit it to 5%, but I certainly never heard anyone in the government say that.
Well, Mark Menzies, for a start off, said it would be limited to 5%.
No objection to nuclear either. I think they both have a part to play. But renewables and nuclear cannot, combined even, satisfy our energy needs. We need gas. Everybody here is probably using gas to heat your houses or cook your food. Everybody. So you need gas. So offshore gas declined. We are currently importing 50% of our gas. By 2030, we'll be importing 90% of our gas. Offshore gas is in free fall.
Let's if I can.
No, Francis, it's going to be limited. It's going to be limited to 5%. That's the reality of the situation.
Hold on a sec, so we're not going to hear anybody if everyone speaks. Tom Crotty.
If I could just pick up this issue on offshore for a moment, because I don't have an axe to grind here. We're not in this industry. We're a user. We're like you, only we use a lot more to make products that everybody uses in their everyday life. We currently get our gas from the North Sea. We can currently only run our North Sea-based plants at half rate because the North Sea is in free fall decline, exactly as Francis has said. And we have to find a way to replace that. It's a choice. You know, the country has a choice. It can do that, or it can choose to let its energy-intensive industries disappear and therefore lose its manufacturing base. I think that's a choice, and that's the reality of the decisions we've got to make. They're tough decisions, and we have to make those tough decisions.
Barbara Keeley?
Well, just very briefly, we're hearing it's a choice. My community doesn't have a choice. My community has had this foisted on them when they didn't know what to expect, and it's causing great distress and impact on their lives. And I think we have a government that isn't interested in renewables. We have a Prime Minister that says he's going all out for shale gas. So the balance and the choice has gone out of this discussion. This government is doing everything it can, including bribes to local councils. It's just a really interesting point. Choice. Who's got the choice? My community doesn't have the choice.
I'm going to go back to Bob because he asked the question. But there's Bob.
I'm all in favour of us doing all we can to reduce energy need, and I'm all in favour of doing what we can to develop renewable sources of energy. But it strikes me that there's still going to be a gap. And it's the alternatives that we have to fill that gap that I don't like any of them, really. I'm very wary of fracking and the effect that can cause on the locality where fracking is taking place.
Bob, do you live near a
Yes, I live nearby,
yes.
I'm very bothered at the idea of nuclear power and the 1,000 years legacy that leaves behind. I just don't like the situation we're in. It's a very difficult one indeed.
OK, thank you very much. A reminder, you're listening to Fracking the Big Debate here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. Right, can we have our next question, please?
Hello, I'm Anne Selby. I'm the Chief Exec of the Wildlife Trust for Lancashire, Manchester, Merseyside. My question is really about the sort of regulation. I wanted to ask the panel sort of how confident they are in the ability of the Environment Agency to regulate the wastewater discharges from the fracking industry so that the environment will be protected. And I suppose there's a secondary question there about will the Environment Agency be under undue pressure from the government to let things go ahead anyway?
All right, Anne, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to come to Steve Molyneux now, who has come here, Environment Manager for Lancashire Environment Agency. We're talking particularly about wastewater that comes back out of the well. That was Anne's question. After fracking, which contains potentially dangerous chemicals. So how will this be regulated?
The UK has some of the strictest environmental regulation in the world. In terms of activities that are onshore oil and gas exploration, up to 8 environmental permits may be required for each well site if that's going to go ahead. One of the permits that is always required is what's called an environmental regulations permit, which requires the operators to have a waste management plan for how they're going to deal with the flowback water that comes out of the well. That requires them to detail how much there will be, to test that, to have proper disposal routes and proper containment on site. Those permits are inspected by the Environment Agency. So, for example, at the pre-soil site, the Environment Agency undertook 16 independent inspections of that site, sampling the flowback water 7 times. Yes, there are hazards associated with unconventional gas. Yes, there are chemicals that are dissolved in the water and dissolved from the rocks when it comes back to the surface. But the UK has a very robust industrial treatment facilities that are across the country that can treat this appropriately. But it has to be done under permits, has to be licensed, and is verified by the Environment Agency.
This is something new, though, isn't it? And when it's something relatively new, it's more difficult to regulate. You've no experience, particularly, of this.
I wouldn't say it was new. The types of effluents that are being produced are non-hazardous. The Environment Agency has over 15 years of experience of regulating British UK industry to very high standards to protect people in the environment. So whilst fracking in UK may be new, the types of chemicals that are used, the types of effluents that are produced aren't new to regulators.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Mike Hill, you're an engineer. You've studied the regulation of the shale gas industry. Are you confident in how it will be regulated here in the UK?
Absolutely not. In the 3 years that I have been studying the regulations here, and I'm an oil and gas engineer myself for 20 years, I was in wireline and then seismic. So just to touch on John's point there, some of the sources used in wireline are around the size of 18 curies. And to give that some perspective for you, if you picked up one of the sources, and it's about the size of this pack of mints, for example, and you put it in your pocket, and you kept it in your pocket for an hour, you'd have a 50% chance of surviving a month. So they're rather large sources. But that aside, in terms of the regulation, to go back on that, they don't check the quantity of flowback, and that flowback water is very difficult to dispose of and very expensive to dispose of. The standards they're using at the moment, they've issued last year new shale gas standards, they're using refinery standards, which is completely a different sector, to protect groundwater. They don't understand the shale gas industry, and in fact, to be honest, they don't really understand the oil and gas industry at all. And the reason for that is because they've never had to regulate it. 99% of all our exploration and development has been offshore, not onshore. And just to put one other little issue to bed, fracking is new, not old. When people talk about fracking, we're actually talking now about high-volume hydraulic fracturing. It bears no relation, or a very, very small relation, to original hydraulic fracturing. It's like comparing a small corner grocery shop with Walmart or Tesco. And in the fracking game, size actually matters. So it is important the regulations are upgraded to include shale gas. The Royal Society stated that must be done. It has not been done at all, and I'm working with both Professor Mayer, the Royal Society, and my own institution at looking at just why this hasn't been done and what progress now needs to be made to allow fracking to continue in the UK.
Tom Crotty. How confident are you in the regulation of the shale gas industry?
I can speak, as I'm not in the shale gas industry, I can speak about the regulatory environment in which we operate as the chemical industry, which is extremely high. It's the toughest in the world. We work very closely with the Environment Agency. If you take a site like Runcorn, it's a very big site. It's very, very tightly regulated. We have a situation where we cannot let anything leak into the outfalls of that site because it will throw our permits out. So believe me, the regulatory environment in this country is as tough as it gets. And I would have high confidence that that same regulatory environment will be applied to this new industry. From standing outside it, that's how it looks to me.
With all due respect there, Tom, your industry is above ground. You can inspect your industry, you can verify what's happening, you can look at filtrate receivers. If you're not verifying the quantity of flowback that flows back up the well, what we saw in the States was it was very tempting for the operator to under-declare or accidentally lose a certain quantity of that flowback before it reached the treatment facility, which could save the operator a significant amount of money.
I find that offensive, Mike.
It's the reality. Look, you're a private company. It's the reality, Francis.
Where is it the reality? Where's your evidence to show that's the reality?
It's the reality in
Where
the
is your
States.
evidence to show that's the reality here?
I'm not saying you've done it
You
here.
just said that.
It's the reality. I'm not saying you've done it here.
You just said
I said that it's tempting for you to under-declare if it's not verified at the surface. Of course it's tempting for you to under-declare. It's a huge cost to you, Francis.
OK, Barbara Keeley. Let's bring Barbara in. Do you think that the Environment Agency is under pressure from the government in any way to let...
Massive pressure. I mean, the Prime Minister has said he's going to go all out for shale gas and he's going to win this debate. I mean, what does that tell you about the pressure that is on from the top of government? But the starting point for the question was about the damage that can be done in terms of this issue of water. I have repeatedly raised with government ministers, and most recently there was a piece of legislation, a water bill, and raised with the Environment Secretary issues about that. And these were just dismissed. I never get any answers. There's a real fear that the water needs of this industry, or polluted water, will have a real impact on our natural areas and on wildlife. And so I'm worried about it from the people point of view. I'm worried about it from wildlife. I'm worried about it from that precious Mosslands resource. Why on earth this company and the landowner came along and dumped this industrial process with its chemicals and its radioactive substances down next to one of our most precious greenbelt resources is beyond me. But that's the situation we find ourselves in.
Okay. I should say...
I wouldn't call it water.
I should say we did ask the government to take part in tonight's discussion, but as you can see, nobody was available. Francis Egan from Quadrilla. There's been a lot of concern, and maybe understandable concern about water supplies. Will they be monitored? Should they be monitored throughout the process and after the process?
Yes, somebody said that the Environment Agency don't have experience in this onshore. I mean, that's just not true. The Wych Farm field in Dorset in south of England was at one point the largest onshore producing field in Europe, producing 100,000 barrels of oil a day. With that oil comes tens of millions of gallons of flowback water. Exactly the same constituents, exactly the same issues with naturally occurring radioactivity material, treated, disposed of, without incident. So the Environment Agency have a lot of experience in this, and I do believe that the Environment Agency, they have got excellent people, they've got excellent systems, as do the HSE, and I have complete confidence that the industry will be regulated.
I'm going to come back to you, Stephen, just to give you a bit of a right of reply here. Barbara seems to think that the Environment Agency would be under pressure.
Quite a lot has just been said, and I don't recognise a lot of the facts that have been said. The Environment Agency is the principal regulator in England for the environment. Our staff are entrusted to ensure that industry works to a very high standard to ensure that people and the environment are protected. All our work is up to public scrutiny, is available. Permits that are applied for are publicly consulted on for shale gas activity, so the public can have their say and see what's written into those permits. In those permits is a requirement to record how much flowback water is produced and state how that's going to be dealt with, and that is independently inspected by our inspectors. So the Environment Agency are there to ensure that the high standards of UK law are enforced, and that is our role, and our staff will stand by that.
Okay,
the
Steve,
Environment
thank you very much.
Told to issue standard permits in 2 weeks, and that won't involve any public consultation, so it's going in completely the wrong direction. There's not going to be any community involvement in this at all, and you know that's a fact. And you know also the Environment Agency are being cut, 15% staff cuts, resource cuts as well, and that's going to have a huge impact. I mean, it's difficult enough already with a handful of wells, 4,000 wells. How is the Environment Agency going to cope with that? And just
That's
one
right.
quick point.
It's gone from 4 to 6 months to 14 days.
Okay, Mike, just let Helen finish her point and then we'll move on.
GDF, who invested in Dart Energy, who have got licences in Cheshire, cited one of the reasons for why they chose the UK over any other country in Europe was that we had a much less challenging regulatory regime here. And I think that tells you all you need to know about the regulations in the UK.
Right, this is... I think this is... Let's be really clear about this. The UK's regulatory regime is considered a global exemplar by the globe.
By the industry.
Because it was looked at post what happened in America, and they looked at it, and the Norwegian and the UK's regulatory system is seen as the global exemplar.
And that's why the government scrapped the offshore safety division, isn't it? That's why
let's go one step further. We onshore are regulated in exactly the same way as the offshore industry is regulated. So it's the Department of Energy and Climate Change, the Environment Agency, the HSE.
That's not true. The
Environment Agency
are not offshore.
Mike,
that is not true.
Mike, that's absolutely true. The the Department of Energy and Climate Change and the Health and Safety Executive. Onshore, we also have the Environment Agency regulating us. We also have the local planning officers and the council regulating us. And we also have one other important constituent regulating us, which is the communities in which we operate, who watch us 24/7.
All right, well, let's bring...
There are over 2,000 wells onshore for oil and gas that have been drilled in the UK.
None of them have
Yes,
been
there have. There are over 200 have been fracked.
No, they haven't. That's absolute tripe, and you know it.
1 second. Let John answer the question.
No, DEC says over 200. Those wells. But let's. If you take nothing away from this evening, take this 1 point away.
But you told us lies.
Take this 1 point. There is this whole debate, right, is being called fracking. Fracking is not actually the issue. The issue, and the thing that you have to hold us, the industry, to account, is something called well integrity. If we design, construct, and drill that well properly, leaks will not occur, etc. So that's the issue that you ought to be concerned about.
This seems like a perfect opportunity to bring in Peter Brown, Deputy Director of Policy at the Health and Safety Executive. It's your job to check and inspect the wells. How will you do that? How confident are you that you can do that?
Good evening. I'd just like to start by saying the system we apply to fracking is based on 25 years of experience of regulating offshore drilling and extraction, so we've got a lot of experience in this area. The approach we use is to start off with standards established by the industry with input from ourselves and the Environment Agency. So there's good practice standards for well integrity, very available, very accessible. There's a requirement in law for every drilling operation to be checked by an independent well expert who monitors the construction, the maintenance and the operation of the proceedings, and who submits reports to the Health and Safety Executive for checking. We've also given an undertaking with our colleagues in the Environment Agency to visit every shale site during this exploratory phase and check the safety and environmental critical elements of that site.
Do the companies themselves have responsibility for checking the wells as well?
The companies do have the responsibility to check under the law. The prime responsibility is with the duty holder within the law.
And how often is that throughout the process, after the process, before the process?
It's all through, from design to completion to abandonment of the well.
In terms of checking the wells, the HSE have not checked the wells that Quadrilla have drilled in Lancashire once for well integrity in the entire time they've been
here.
I
was going to ask you that, Peter. Is that true?
We've had regular discussions with Quadrilla.
Discussions. We've
have
not
you actually checked
once. And those discussions were in Aberdeen. You would not come down to Fylde Borough Council and discuss this once. And I was told by one of your operators there in the HSE that basically you couldn't afford the petrol money to do so. And so why would you come down? And I wouldn't expect to pay it out of my own wallet.
Let's just ask Peter to reply to that. Have they been checked?
We have visited the sites.
Do I take that as a no?
No, you don't take it as a no, because the checks are done through the provision of plans and designs. Let me just suggest we think about a well and how much of it is actually visible, because a well is obviously under the ground. We could visit a site and we can look at.
But you can use wireline tools. You can use annular pressure readings.
The critical part of the check is the design of the well.
But that's a concern, isn't it? I mean, that will be a concern to people here today, that if you haven't checked the few that are here now, what about when there are hundreds of them? How is the HSE going to check them then?
We can check all the wells that are being planned at the moment. My colleagues...
Can I just say that the HSE have checked all the wells? It's completely disingenuous of Mike to say they haven't checked the wells. Let me finish what I'm saying, please. So that the HSE get copies of every single well log. Mike said there are well logs. They get copies of the daily well reports. So unless you're going to suggest, Mike, that in addition to dumping the water, we're also fabricating the daily reports, then the HSE get a copy of every single...
I'm sorry, Francis.
And they evaluate it. And if they have questions on it, which sometimes they do, they ask us.
Anne Selby, you asked the question. What do you think from what you've heard?
Thank you. I mean, I wasn't being critical of the Environment Agency. As the Wildlife Trust, we do a lot of work with the Environment Agency, and I do think they are good regulators. It is really the framework that the government's going to put them in is the issue. And I think the question that was behind the point I was making is that actually it's the quantum, really. We're concerned, obviously, as a Wildlife Trust about the water bodies, the marine and other wildlife, and the disposal of the amount of wastewater, the salinity of it, which you can't put through wastewater treatment plants, and is highly toxic at the levels of concentration. And it's just really the quantities are going to be significant, and I think that's what's been giving us some concern.
All right, Anne, thank you very much. You're listening to Fracking, the big debate here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. Can we have our next question, please?
Thank you. I am Paul Foster from the Federation of Small Businesses. What views do the panel have on the potential economic benefits of fracking from both a local and national perspective?
Okay. So, economic benefits. I'll come to you first, Barbara, because this is possibly happening in one of your constituencies. Can you see some economic benefits to your constituencies?
No, not at all. I can only see disbenefits. I'm struggling to try to help a group of people with businesses local to the iGas site who find that they're hemmed in. The controversy around the site has actually, the protest and the policing means that people can't get, somebody told me that her accountant couldn't even get to visit her. She's penned in, her staff can't get in and out. If they come to work, they can't get home. All of those issues. It's having quite a severe economic impact. There's traffic congestion. There's all kinds of problems for local people. Sometimes we have to go a very long way around. So there's no benefit. I have never believed that there will be a substantial economic benefit to my constituents because the negative side of this, the disbenefits, are enormous. And the jobs. I've always believed there's a lot of exaggeration around this claim of jobs. That I've asked iGas to tell me how many local people they might be employing, and I haven't really got much reassurance there. I think that the skilled engineering people will be brought in. There might be the odd security job, but the loss to the businesses and the loss to our future at Chat Moss of agriculture, leisure, the other things that we wanted to do and planned to do in our area, these will all be gone if this industrial process carries on in this sort of mixed urban, semi-rural area.
Tom, you sort of alluded to this earlier, that you believe this could have big economic benefits for the region.
I believe it can, and I believe there's a bigger issue here. People might not want to recognise this, but this country is facing an energy crisis. It really is facing an energy... Yes, it is. I'm sorry. You can keep shouting no, but it is facing an energy crisis. We need a mixed economy on energy in this country. I'm sorry. We need a mixed economy on energy in this country. We need renewables. We need nuclear. We need gas. And we have to have all of those. You can't run an energy economy on renewables. It cannot work. A, because you can't get enough, and B, when the wind don't blow, the turbines don't run. When the sun don't shine, the panels don't work.
Helen, this is your subject.
You must have, I'm sorry, I'm trying to say some simple facts. You must have backup generation. That backup generation in the short to medium term has to come from fossil fuels. The fossil fuels that we've got, and particularly gas, are in dramatic decline. And whether we like to recognise that or not, we are going to face a crisis in this country. I believe that shale gas is an answer to that crisis. And it's one that we as a country must recognise, because if we don't, we will not have an industrialised economy in this country in 20 years' time. That's the truth.
Helen Rimmer from Friends of the Earth. Is it time to move away from the arguments to and from and just think, can this be made to work? Because it could bring economic benefits.
One of the reasons you gave was that it's going to bring down energy prices, and no one is saying this is going to bring down energy prices. Someone in the audience might have said that. The Secretary of State says it won't bring down energy prices. Energy experts say it won't, and even I think we've heard Francis Egan say it at one point. But on the jobs question, clearly any new industry is going to bring jobs to an area, but they've been vastly exaggerated. The figure, I'm surprised you've not mentioned it yet, of 74,000, which David Cameron has quoted, came from a report that Quadrilla paid for, whereas an independent report for his own government was actually a third of that at the top level. So it's been vastly exaggerated. The short-term, specialised, many workers coming into the area, not local, and that's in the independent report to government. So it's been vastly exaggerated, and we think there's a much better alternative in our renewable energies. Already 10,000 people in the northwest are employed in renewable energy. That could be vastly more over the next few years if we up our renewables, and also energy efficiency, which is hugely job intensive. We have some of the worst housing in Europe for leaking heat, and if we were to address that, that would create tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of new jobs.
Well, John Blamires from iGas, what is the figure then on jobs? Because there are different figures banded around, aren't there? How many jobs are going to be created in the northwest from this?
There are various figures that have been quoted, ranging from about 24,000 to 74,000 in the UK associated with this, and that's just direct jobs. Then you've got to start talking about the indirect jobs that go around supporting the supply chain that goes with this. On top of that, you've really got to start looking, and you look around this area and the number of industries that are reliant on gas to power it, to be the feedstock. What's happening is at the moment, because of shale gas in the US, the gas price there is about $3 to $4 per 1,000 standard cubic feet. Here it's somewhere between $8 and $11 per 1,000 standard cubic feet. We cannot compete like that. Industries that are reliant upon gas can't. And what's happening is they're going from this country and from Europe back to the US. We have a situation where we are buying shale gas from the US. So in terms of our balance of payments, there are billions of pounds being spent to buy shale gas from the US and then bring it back to the UK.
We're exporting North Sea gas. Why every day do we export North Sea gas?
We are importing gas. Nearly 50% of our gas now is imported. So what we're saying is that we are sitting on top of a huge resource that if we were to take advantage of that, that will bring jobs, it'll bring skills, it'll be training. And we have to understand this.
John, I'll just bring Francis in very, very briefly before we go back to Paul.
So I agree with some of what Helen has said. In fact, I don't see that shale gas means you can't do renewables. Frankly, the country needs all the jobs it can get. Our graduates are coming out of university and are not finding work or work that they trained for. I'm absolutely convinced that the Northwest, Lancashire, has the capability to develop this safely, irrespective of what everybody says happened or didn't happen in America or Australia. This is a country that can do this.
Paul, let's hear from Paul Foster, Federation of Small Businesses in Lancashire, who asked the question.
Thank you. Yes, keen to ensure that any jobs created are for the benefit of local communities, for local people and existing local businesses. Supply chain was mentioned. That's very important. And on the issue of energy costs, it's a huge issue for particularly small businesses. Increases all the time, and a key problem for them does need addressing somehow.
Just a reminder. You are listening to Fracking, the big debate here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. If you want to have your say on this subject, on fracking, then you can do so. It's on a phone-in that will be following this debate. OK. Our next question, please.
Hello, I'm Jackie Copley from the Lancashire branch of the Campaign to Protect Rural England. Given the scale of shale gas exploitation envisaged by the Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer, would involve the creation of thousands of fracked wells. What is the minimum separation distance between well pads, as we understand the frequency of pads will significantly impact on the landscape?
OK, John Blamos, my guess.
Right. Let's just deal with some facts here. I hear people talking about we're going to industrialise the north. That's not the case. Let's just take a look. Let's use, for example, the amount of energy that is derived from a solar site versus a shale site. Just to put something into perspective for you here. Typically, most solar sites, there are about 120 of them that are over 10 acres of area that are covered by them. We will typically develop a shale site that will occupy about 1 to 2 acres. And it'll have 8 to 10 wells on there. And the amount of energy that comes off that is about 600 times the amount that comes off a similar-sized solar site. So you've got to put this into some perspective. In terms of what sort of separation between these sites, we're drilling down to somewhere in the order of about 10,000 feet. We can then drill out about another 10,000, 15,000 feet out from there. So you're looking at sort of 5-6 square kilometre area, drainage area from a single site. So you will, most of the time you won't even see it. We have a coal bed methane site that's just not far away from here, and people don't realise it's there. We operate oil fields in the South Downs, in the East Midlands, and again, people don't realise it's there. So we have a long history of sort of over 40 years of developing oil and gas sites and doing it in a way that's It's exactly the same. There is no difference. Another misnomer.
Okay. John, could I just ask? I mean, how long are these the drilling pads, the rigs up for?
The rig, say if it's a 10-well site, and you're probably talking something of a month to 2 months, you're looking maybe at 12 months to 18 months for the rig being on site, and then it goes. And then you can't really see anything after that, because it goes, and for the next 20 years, there are no trucks. Once we're producing, they've gone. At the moment in the US, they are looking at the idea of return visits, as you put it, and they're looking after about 10 years, they might come back and refrack, and that takes couple of weeks to do that, and then they go away again.
Shale gas wells drop off a lot faster than 10 years. But can I just say, sorry, Jackie asked about industrialisation, and the distance between the pads and things along those lines. The UK plans now, the industry plans for the UK to install the first ever super pads. So in the States, we've had pads up to maybe a maximum of 15 wells. We're looking in the UK now of having pads with 40 wells on. And to start comparing it with solar is just absolutely ridiculous, because solar pads don't require 14,000 trucks just to get rid of the flowback. Solar pads don't require generators, lighting, compressors, silica, sand, chemicals, drilling mud, waste. They don't require any of this. This is a full-on industrialisation of the Northwest. And for those communities living near fracking pads, it's going to be absolute bloody misery for years.
Okay.
For years.
I will come to you in a moment, Barbara, but Tom Crotty, do you have concerns about what this could do to local communities, local environment, to the landscape?
Clearly, making sure that what happens is done with the local community in mind is critical. We have the same issue when we operate chemical plants. We make sure we have a relationship with the local community that hopefully works.
Barbara Keeley, this is happening around you, around your constituents. What are your fears?
My fears are, as Mike has said, about large-scale industrialisation. People are already experiencing noise, traffic, vibration. We look back to the original planning application, and it's amusing now to look back on how our councillors were fooled by this. It was all going to be low-key. It was all going to be small-scale. It is not low-key and small-scale because of all the reasons that we've just touched on. So it is... and what's really important too is what we're suffering is because it's such a badly chosen site. This industrial process, this controversial process, has been brought into a sort of semi-rural area near urban estates next to a motorway. The police are tearing their hair out trying to make all of this work, because there's a motorway on one side of it and an airport on the other. There is a secure unit where children are serving out their sentences a quarter of a mile away. There are farms which are being damaged, businesses that are being damaged, and people working and living. It is horrendous. I wouldn't wish this is only in the exploratory phase, and I can see the impact it's having. I wouldn't wish this large scale on any community, and I think it should never have been brought into ours.
I have remained very quiet. Barbara, I have remained very quiet about a lot of the accusations you say, but I think you ought to really clarify for everyone. A lot of the issues that you talked about are because of the presence of the protesters, not because of...
Can I say that residents and local people say to me that if you were not there wouldn't be a protest there. You have brought the controversy. You have brought this onto our back door. And not only are we paying in terms of people losing business, loss of house price, no insurance cover, and all the other damage, we're paying £40,000 a day to police this so that you can go ahead with it. And
Barbara,
the costs are heading towards £1 million that we, the taxpayers in this room, are paying for this process.
Yes. And why is that being incurred? Because the protesters aren't allowing the local residents, the local businesses, and ourselves to go about the legal and lawful rights.
That doesn't affect the number of trucks you need, does it?
Yeah, but there are trucks going up and down that road every day. The issue is the reason that the police are involved is because the protesters are preventing people from going about their lawful business.
That is absolute nonsense.
All right, let's go back to
There's a
Jackie.
huge amount of support for the protection camp from locals, and you know that because you've heard that yourself. There's a huge amount of support, and those protectors there with the blessing of the local residents who are coming along bringing food, bringing clothing, bringing warm bedding for the
and are also being intimidated
because
by a
people
small
are feeling
percentage of
failed
those
because
protesters.
their council did not consult them on this, and certainly no political party consulted them on this. This was in no party's manifesto, so this has been done without a democratic mandate. So people are there protesting because they have a right, because they have not given their consent.
I'm afraid we've reached our final question on air pollution. Karen Ditchfield.
Bearing in mind the reports coming out of the USA which show that a single well can release over 100 tonnes of volatile organic compounds and tonnes of hazardous air pollutants whilst bringing a well into production, do you not think it is negligent and highly irresponsible for companies like Quadrilla and iGas to even consider drilling sites so close to villages and local communities?
Francis Egan.
So, again, I'm not going to comment on a report I haven't seen out of the US. We will measure the quality of the air before we start operation. We will report on that. We will measure the quality of the air as we operate. And we will measure the quality of the air after we've finished operation. If at any point we breach the standards that will be put into our planning consent, and the Environment Agency, and again I'm sure they'll confirm this, will come along and take their own independent measures, we will be shut down. In the US, there are 15 million people living within 1 mile of a fracked well. 15 million. Now, do you seriously think that if the US were doing what Mike has said, desolating the country, giving unborn children, abortions, that would be allowed to continue with 15 million people? It's ridiculous.
Helen Rimmer.
You're saying all the reports from America are not true. You're saying
okay,
evidence.
Let's let somebody else have a go. Helen.
Yeah, the evidence from America is mounting, and there has been a gap in the data because there have been various loopholes. But the Public Health England report actually does point to some serious health risks, which doesn't. It makes the conclusion that they come to completely illogical, that it's of low risk. When you actually look at the reports that they have in that report, it's just completely illogical. And I think the point about the density of population is very important. And we're seeing sites nearby schools, as Barbara has outlined, in Barton Moss, in Lancashire as well, and also now in Cheshire, where Dart are hoping to drill. It's right opposite a school, and the head teacher there and the governors are all completely opposed to this and feel like they haven't been consulted and given their consent. So it's a very real problem. I think the public health risks are very serious.
Climate change. Karen is absolutely right in what she says, in so much as she's in total agreement with Professor Mike Stevenson of the British Geological Survey, who recently stated that the UK is far too densely a populated country to support a large-scale fracking industry. We are not the US, this is the UK, it is different. Maybe in other countries where there's a huge landmass, it might or might not be possible, that's open to argument, but not the UK. And for Francis to say he's going to monitor this and monitor that, with all due respect, Francis, I don't trust a thing you say or do. I trust the HSE, I trust the EA, I trust independent monitors. This cannot be self-regulatory. We can't rely on self-regulation. We've seen it.
The Environment
Agency, in the financial services.
The Environment Agency will come along and they will do their own monitoring.
We've seen it in the Care Quality Commission. We cannot have a self-regulatory regime in the UK.
Mike, if we were self-regulatory, why are we on?
It is entirely self-regulatory, Francis.
Why are we not doing it now, then?
You send a fax
why are we not out there
to the HSE
doing it now, then?
to say it's all tickety-boo, so we're doing just fine, thanks.
So why aren't we drilling?
That is the regulation.
Why aren't we drilling,
It's a total disgrace.
Why aren't we drilling?
It is an absolute total disgrace.
Why aren't we drilling?
You know it, Francis. You know.
You're
Mike,
talking rubbish.
One second. Steve Molyneux, is it self-regulatory?
Well, in terms of air quality, as I said before, the fracking sites may require up to 8 environmental permits. There are risks around air quality for fracking sites. They're principally, I think the Public Health England assessment pointed towards this, around the exhaust fumes.
Draft report.
Around exhaust fumes from the fracking equipment, but also there's the gas that returns to the surface. Fracking operators are required to apply for permits to detail how they're going to safely manage those, to ensure that they use technology to reduce emissions, and if there's gas produced and it's flared, flaring of gas has to be done in line with what's called best available techniques, so the best standards that can apply across the EU. They are required to monitor the air quality around those emissions, and we are required to go and independently assess those, which we do if we issue permits.
You cannot have a situation where external inspectors are on site 24 hours a day. There has to be...
Tom, sorry.
No, let me finish. You have to have a situation where the onus is on the operator to
Mike, I'll let you come
prove
back.
that they are doing things properly, and if they're not, they get prosecuted. That's the system we use in this country.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm afraid that is all the questions that we have time for. Thank you to all our panel guests, to Mike Hill, Helen Rimmer, Barbara Keeley, to Tom Crotty, John Blaymyers and Francis Egan. Thank you very much. And thank you, of course, to our audience here at Haydock Park Racecourse. You've been listening to Fracking, the big debate on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. Thank you for a very wonderful and lively debate.
Lively.
Goodbye.